Netanyahu was overcompensating and was afraid of the truth getting out, which is that, as Charlie Kirk's longtime friend told me, Charlie Kirk had grown to hate Netanyahu, that he was frightened by the way he was being treated. Basically, a mafia was reading him the riot act.
Max Blumenthal just exposed Israel's pressure campaign against Charlie Kirk in the final days of his life, and in this clip, he discusses what this means as it pertains to Charlie's shift in sensibilities regarding Israel, why so many people are trying to recapture the American right now, Netanyahu's response, and whether Israel had any culpability in his death. So let's get his take on this. He's the one that broke this story at the Gray Zone. Please like the video and subscribe to the channel.
In terms of civil liberties and repression, let's talk a little bit about the article that you just published about Kirk's alienation or distance from the Zionist lobby. I know you've been writing about Kirk for some time.
Yeah, I've been writing about him since 2015, 3 years after he started TPUSA, which became the largest, most influential conservative youth organization in history. And at that time, he was at the forefront of a massive infusion of Israel lobby cash into his group through the David Horowitz Freedom Center, which was basically making him the property of Israel. In exchange for this sort of Faustian bargain, he was going to be at the top of the conservative youth grassroots, or astroturfed grassroots. And so he could talk about race, immigration, all the social issues, and take the most extreme lines possible, say whatever he wanted, as long as he pushed this so-called Judeo-Christian relationship and constantly talked about the Judeo-Christian roots of the country and supported Israel and attacked BDS, the BDS movement, which was growing on campus at the whenever he could.
Well, I don't know if he had the liberty to say anything, I don't know if he was able to say, I'm an anarchist and there shouldn't be any government and all interactions should be voluntary. Both parties are terrible. I don't know if he had that liberty, but Max's point is well taken. There was this desire to make sure, based on the donors that were feeding Turning Point USA and Charlie Kirk, that he stay on message, that it's Israel first. We can say that's America first, but you have to support Israel, and that's what his donors expected, very clearly so in this case.
So Charlie Kirk was actually at the forefront of many of the blacklisting operations that have targeted college professors as well as students. Charlie Kirk is the most influential conservative activist, period. He is on his way to possibly becoming the next president. Almost certainly would have become senator even though he's from Illinois. And he runs, TPUSA is major, but there's a crisis taking place. Charlie Kirk is under pressure from his own grassroots on the issue of Israel. Israel's exerting under Netanyahu so much control on Trump amid a genocide that the grassroots have turned against it. And if you look at recent polling, YouGov polling, Pew polling, all of them show about only 25% of Republicans under 35 support Israel over the Palestinians. If you actually pay attention to what Nick Fuentes, who's the most influential right-wing, America First streamer, says, they're not just upset over Jewish influence. They're not just being anti-Jewish. They're actually upset by the same things that upset us. The deliberate starvation of a civilian population unfolding in real time, and then watching their president just fold to a foreign apartheid state. And so this pressure was building within Charlie Kirk's camp, and Charlie Kirk himself was beginning to turn, and it all exploded out in the open at the Student Action Summit, which I believe was in Tampa, Florida, in July 2025. And that's where Charlie Kirk brought Tucker Carlson, someone who had already turned on this issue, on stage to not only talk about how Jeffrey Epstein was possibly a Mossad agent, but to call for those who had gone and fought for Israel, American Jews who had gone to fought for Israel's military, rather than the U.S. military to be stripped of their citizenship. And he called out Bill Ackman, one of the most influential Zionist billionaires in the U.S., who's a Netanyahu cutout, who had been sort of manipulating and bullying Harvard into submission. His money.
Yeah, this is absolutely true. And man, this is not what those Zionist donors wanted to hear from Tucker Carlson. Max is not overplaying this story. This was major. And not only did he have Tucker Carlson speak and say, that Epstein was likely a Mossad agent, but he also said that it's not anti-Semitic to criticize Israel. That's not what people like Bill Ackman and Seth Dillon want you to hear. And just take a look at this. This is the video of him talking about this.
Not acceptable. And I think the real answer is Jeffrey Epstein was working on behalf of intel services, probably not American. And we have every right to ask, on whose behalf was he working? How does a guy go from being a math teacher at the Dalton School in the late 70s with no college degree to having multiple airplanes, a private island, and the largest residential house in Manhattan? Where did all the money come from? And no one has ever gotten to the bottom of that because no one has ever tried. And moreover, it's extremely obvious to anyone who watches that this guy had direct connections to a foreign government. Now, no one's allowed to say that that foreign government is Israel because we have been somehow cowed into thinking that that's naughty.
Just think about that. How undesirable that Zionists would react to that. How, impossible it is that you could allow this to happen. And this is what produced that backlash. And Max talks about this in his article, that Charlie Kirk was frightened about the backlash he got from some donors following this. And it's not just this, it's Dave Smith's debate against Josh Hammer, where the same kind of backlash emerged because, essentially Josh got destroyed by Dave. And I'm not just saying that because I side with Dave over these issues, which I do, but based on the applause of the crowd. This was a young conservative audience that isn't the right-wing boomer neocon Zionists of your father's generation. And that's not to slam boomers that do oppose Israel, certainly so, but that is what the demographics show. So this is a story.
He got Claudine Gay as president out at Harvard. He mocked Bill Ackman as a financial con artist. He literally called him a scam artist and questioned where his money came from. And the crowd was cheering and delighting in this entire spectacle. Megyn Kelly from Fox was calling Jeffrey Epstein a Mossad agent. Then Charlie Kirk opened up the floor to a debate on the very issue of Zionism and brought on an anti-Zionist Jew, a comedian named Dave Smith, to debate a Zionist apparatchik at Newsweek named Joshua Hammer. And Dave Smith mopped the floor with him. He's very effective. He was also talking about human rights abuses, and the crowd was clearly with him. And after this summit, Charlie Kirk was bombarded with furious text messages, phone calls. There may have been meetings as well, very tense meetings as well, with his donors, the people who built him up. And they said, we built you up. We can take all of this away from you if you don't stop this. We are laying down the law. And this offended him, alienated him. He was not used to being talked to like that, where as though he were property.
Yeah, and this came out in his comments on the Megyn Kelly show, I think the day after this meeting or 2 days after, where he talked about it. He, was very frustrated about people questioning his character and his loyalty, especially given his track record at supporting Israel. This is what he said. It's all of a sudden, oh, Charlie, he's no longer with us. Wait a second. What does with us mean exactly? I'm an American, okay? I represent this country, he explained before addressing the powerful Zionist interest harassing him. And he talked about this. This leaps off the page, and he complains about the fact that he can't, even raise the most minor criticisms against Israel, even less so than an Israeli can. He took serious exception to this, and this came up in that Megyn Kelly episode, but don't take my word for it. Actually watch it. I think it was an August 6th episode of the Megyn Kelly show where he talks about that.
But, when you join the firm, you don't get to leave. And at the same time, I was told by a longtime friend of Charlie Kirk that he was frightened by the way he was being treated. Basically, a mafia was reading him the riot act. And he wasn't the only one who was frightened. I was told that, in this, the source is someone who knows people in the White House. Donald Trump's frightened. Donald Trump is afraid to defy Netanyahu. He's afraid about what can happen. And I was told that during one of Netanyahu's, or several of Netanyahu's recent visits to the U.S., I think he's made 4 visits this year, which is unprecedented. Listening devices were planted by Israeli agents on the Secret Service's emergency response vehicles. Stingray devices, some kind of listening device, electronic surveillance device. This was found by the Secret Service. It was told to the White House. Obviously, the White House kept it under wraps. And this has, made people nervous inside the White House and the national security team. And this is not something unprecedented. Politico in 2019 reported, citing 3 former U.S. officials, that Israel had planted Stingray devices around the White House to spy on Trump's cell phone communications.
And he's maybe going to talk about it here.
Boris Johnson, the former Israeli PM, wrote in his memoir that Netanyahu went to use his personal toilet, and afterwards his personal security team found a listening device in his toilet, like immediately afterwards.
Yeah, this is true. Here's how the Telegraph reported this. Bugging device found in my bathroom after Netanyahu visit, claims Boris Johnson. This was widely reported at the time, so Max is right. This isn't just some kooky conspiracy theory about Netanyahu and Israeli intelligence and intelligence gathering. Listening devices, these kind of operations against American and British politicians, ostensibly allies of Israel, trying to gather data from our allies. Yet you don't hear this in the legacy media in America because it's so captivated by this toxic Israel first mentality.
Tony Blair told his own team, when you go to Israel, do not speak about anything sensitive in government buildings or cars. So I don't think I'm being fed a bunch of conspiracy theories here, and what I reported based on background sourcing matches up with the things that Charlie Kirk said in public, that he was being bombarded by what he called Jewish stakeholders, meaning his funders, and that he felt that he could not express his own views anymore as an American. And he was starting to move in public. So consider the consequence of a figure like Charlie Kirk, who's on his way to basically inheriting the mantle of Trumpism at some point, and who controls a large segment of that movement, taking the base away from the Judeo-Christian relationship, taking it away from rock-solid support for Israel, as Israel is in a 7-front war carrying out genocide, and Netanyahu believes that he has this short window of time to basically carry out regime change in Iran. It would have been catastrophic. And I also learned from multiple sources that Charlie Kirk actually took it upon himself personally to go to the White House and personally lobby Trump against bombing Iran back.
That is true. He was a notable person that did this. This was reported too. He went to the White House personally urging Trump not to bomb Iran. Obviously that happened, but this is corroborated by Charlie's own tweets talking about that at this time, and how bad of a decision it would be to lean on these neocon foreign policy establishment figures that had guided America into foreign policy catastrophes in places like Iraq. And, he didn't call out the Zionist lobby directly there, but the implications were there that, you're leaning on the same people if you go into this that had brought disaster to America. The one exception I have to what Blumenthal is saying, and I don't fully disagree with him, but there is evidence that at some point, Charlie Kirk was maintaining some of the same, Hasbara Zionist propaganda through this phase 2. We can be selective about the narrative. There's no question he was starting to, talk openly about frustrations that you're not allowed to criticize Israel, turning his viewpoints to some extent. But at the same time, in this period, you did see Charlie record some things that were very pro-Israel too, maintaining the propaganda, like this video he posted on July 28th. This is after that meeting, by the way, doubling down on, you know, the notion that there's no starvation in Gaza on behalf of Israel, and, you know, saying things like this wasn't a genocide. Even in that episode with Megyn Kelly on August 6th, you see that too. They are aligning on a lot of the Israeli propaganda. I'll just play a little bit of this.
I hate being lied to, and I hate being propagandized. And this weekend, there was an all-out propaganda campaign trying to make it seem as if Israel is intentionally starving the people of Gaza. I hate being lied to, especially by the media networks. They lied to us about COVID. They lied to us about the vaccines. They lied to us about open borders. They lied to us Hunter Biden laptop. Joining us now is Rabbi Walicki, a great friend, and thank you so much for defending me the other day. Rabbi Walicki, you're also the YouTube, people can find you.
All right, I'll stop there, but just to show you my point being that he did, you know, refute a lot of what he called, you know, Hamas propaganda and things like that to back Israel first policies and to deny starvation when that's been so widely reported. On Megyn Kelly's show, he did things like deny that we can trust the pictures coming out of Gaza because the Palestinians are propagandists, things like this. Just wanted to provide the balanced view that he hadn't turned on Israel completely. It sounds like he was facing pressure and there's some things he didn't like from his donors and from Netanyahu, but that only paints some of the picture. A lot of the other things that happened in that time frame were very pro-Israel, very pro-Zionist, very pro-Hasbara.
In June, and that he was shut down. Trump angrily rebuked him because Trump is simply afraid. He's completely controlled at this point by Netanyahu. So am I saying that Israel killed Charlie Kirk? How would I know that? There's no evidence for that. But how am I going to not report this fascinating background about where the conservative movement in the Republican Party itself are going on the question of Israel when I'm learning all of this after his death? And there are so many unusual aspects to the investigation, so many mishaps by the FBI, and such strange behavior by the Israeli government and Netanyahu himself since Charlie Kirk's killing that it has fueled speculation by millions of people online that there may have been an Israeli role. I mean, why wouldn't they speculate when Israel seems to assassinate everyone that defies it in its own region and has even dispatched thousands of pagers to like low-level Hezbollah members and their families to assassinate them?
Yeah, totally. Regardless of what you think about Israeli culpability, and I doubt it without a through line here, I have the same position as Max Blumenthal and Candace Owens and Dave Smith and George Galloway on this. I see no reason to, without more proof, at least like, you know, with Kennedy, we had the associations with the CIA between Oswald and the CIA, the surveillance, the fact that Dulles was fired by JFK for organizing the Bay of Pigs, but then he was sent to head the Warren Commission. Things like that, we actually had tangible connections to explore in regard to some of these theories. But whether or not you think that, this is a story. I mean, Max Blumenthal's story he printed, this is a serious story. And I think he's been responsible about the journalism here. He says that in his piece, that he doesn't have evidence of that. But it is a story that prominent people are talking about this. And how could they not? If you look at, you know, Israeli assassinations, you can see here that this is the list. It's huge. It's ridiculous. Look at this. It had to be separated by decades in the left column because of how many they are. Israel's notorious for political assassinations and assassinations in general, including just last week in Doha, Qatar, where they slaughtered by bombs. They bombed Qatar, a U.S. ally. Think of that. But no U.S. ally is above Israel in the minds of the AIPAC lobby and the regime. So, you know, that's where we're at. That's why there's this reputation. And I can't blame people for looking that way, especially because Netanyahu's recorded 2 video statements denying it. Did any of Charlie Kirk's friends have to, you know, have videos denying that they had a hand in Charlie's murder? No, we would think that's super, super weird. And I think it's super, super weird that Netanyahu has to do it. But I think it's the reason because that Israel's developed a reputation for ordering assassinations. And I don't think that's unfounded, by the way.
It's something that we would expect in this atmosphere, but I am not making any direct claim that Israel assassinated him. What I'm saying is, I think they would have taken him out. The Israel lobby would have taken him out for sure, but they would not need to do it physically. They could just defund him and then castigate him, as they're doing with figures like Candace Owens or Tucker Carlson, who have turned against them. But so this is just a fascinating look, and it won't be my last one, at Charlie Kirk's final days and the political pressure he was under.
How much money was he getting, number one? And number two, can you talk about Netanyahu's reaction and his, because you write about it in your piece, his interactions with Kirk?
Well, this is something that was not known to the public, and I hope to be able to report this out in greater detail. But I was told that by a friend of Kirk, someone close to Kirk, who was speaking to them in his last days, that Netanyahu actually came in and personally offered to re-up Kirk's TPUSA organization with a massive infusion of Zionist money. And his budget, at its height, was something like $80 million. I mean, we're talking about a lot of money. You can just watch the Student Action Summit that became so controversial. There's nothing like it on the left or even within the Democratic Party's associated organizations. It's very flashy. Look at Charlie Kirk's final moments. I mean, it looked almost like he was running for president. It looked like a Trump rally. And look at the he had enormous amounts of former Navy SEALs and Special Forces guys around him, like executive security. You have to have a lot of money for that. So he already had the money, but he was at risk of losing much of it. And Netanyahu comes in and says, basically, come to the dark side. Stop talking about this, and we will take care of you.
This is corroborated by several accounts, including those of Candace Owens and some close to Charlie, that this summit at the Hamptons did happen. Bill Ackman's responded to it by posting like a 1,000-word essay on Twitter talking about it, denying it, etc. The one exception I want to make is that there is the parallel to the Young Democrats of America on that side. You know, I don't think it was as big of a kind of venture as Turning Point USA was, but you do see comparable organizations to some extent on that side of the fence. So I just want to add that to what Max is saying.
I will call my cutouts and they'll have everything handled. And Charlie Kirk refused. And that was what I'm learning is that was not the first time he refused someone close to Netanyahu in recent months. And it left him feeling cold and anxious, and even, in the words of the friend, frightened. This is something that I've had some conversations with other influential people in the right-wing influencer world since my piece came out. And basically what they want me to know is that this is something they're all facing at all of the major right-wing media organizations associated with Trump, that there is no space for them to criticize Israel. And one figure I could point to, I've actually been on his podcast. He's one of the top right-wing podcasters. Like if you go to Rumble, which is sort of the YouTube alternative, because so many right-wing voices were being banned there, and even us, Chris, like more on the left, we get like demonetized left and right and suppressed on YouTube. So we've even turned to Rumble. But you go to Rumble, like Tim Pool is one of the first. If he's live streaming, that comes up right away. And so he gets enormous amounts of views. And, I went on his show right after October 7th, and he gave me the floor and let me speak my mind. Tim Pool was summoned to a meeting with Netanyahu.
with Netanyahu, sorry it cut off there, but there was a meeting between Tim Pool and other right-wing influencers with Netanyahu, etc. And that episode with Max on Tim Pool was really something special, by the way. Go back and watch that. I think it's still up. He talks about several subjects that aren't exactly pleasing to the Zionist lobby and to AIPAC, including the Dahiyya doctrine, this creed that Israel established, and this idea that if you kill enough civilians, that's a good thing because they will act to overthrow their government. That is not a conspiracy theory. This is well documented. Dahiyya, D-A-H-I-Y-A. Read about it. They employed it in the war against Lebanon in 2006. And then it seems like they tried to redeploy it in Gaza. It sure does seem that way. He talked about that openly on Tim Pool. If you can believe it, I was invited on Tim Pool too. I was on one episode last year in June of 2024. You know, I respect him for having people like me and Blumenthal on. Obviously don't agree with, you know, the pro-Zionist forces on the right, of which Tim Pool's not the most ardent supporter, but he certainly does lean more into that side than the total non-interventionist, anti-Zionist side. So I appreciated him having me, and he's had some really good dissidents on my side of the fence on that issue there, like Scott Horton and Dave Smith too. So I don't want to make this all about like blaming Tim Pool, but this is the pressure of the Zionist lobby in the United States. This is how they respond. They take it as if, you know, you've fallen off the wagon, you're an alcoholic, you need an intervention to toe the line and maintain this Israel first mentality. And I'm not saying that's different than other lobbying interests in that way. Like, I don't think, you know, the political establishment can just come out and say, you know, end the Fed. We shouldn't have an income tax, abolish the IRS, etc. That's, you know, that is said at times by prominent figures. Ron Paul famously did that over and over and over. But this backlash that Charlie Kirk got was palpable, regardless of what you think about how far he was turning against Israel. There's no question his frustration came out in that interview with Megyn Kelly, I think most of all. And I said this in other videos, but I think he was a rock in a hard place, because what happened is he maintained a dynamic that other right-wing influencers didn't have. He had to make connections with the donor class that was infusing his organization with massive amounts of money, with millions of dollars, and he had to maintain a relationship with the young activists knocking on doors, leading campaigns, you know, doing coalitions in the legislatures, and getting people elected for the right wing in America. He had to do both of those things, and he had to walk on a tightrope to do it. So in some ways, his positions on Israel are more explainable, I think, than a lot of people think, and maybe even his own personal inclinations and opinions on these things, which he did share. But at the same time, he was in a place where he almost couldn't go to both sides of that issue and maintain this ship that he was commandeering here. I think that's what we're at here. Great piece. I think this is amazing journalism from Max Blumenthal. Like I said before, whatever you think about Israel's role in his death, this is a major story that should be talked about. And the whole mainstream media has just buried this thing. They've called it a conspiracy theory. You're a kook. You know, the neocons are trying to recapture Charlie Kirk like Netanyahu and, you know, Ben Shapiro doing that right now, recording segments about how he was Israel's greatest friend. He essentially was Ben Shapiro, but he wasn't that. And I had my problems with his policies, but he was between the Ben Shapiro and Dave Smith camp on some of these issues, despite, you know, putting out some really vile pro-Israel propaganda, if you ask me, in the video clips I showed you and some of the things that I demonstrated. But that was the dynamic leading to the end of his life, and I'm glad that Max Blumenthal is bringing that to us. So let me know what you think in the comments below. Is Max right? What are the pressures of the Zionist lobby like in America? And did Israel have culpability in his death? Let me know in the comments down below. Please like this video, subscribe to the channel, subscribe to Chris Hedges. Thanks for this interview. And please consider becoming a YouTube member. If you click the join button below, it'd mean the world to me. You'd help support my channel, and in return for that, I'll give you access to all of my videos before they go live to the general public on YouTube. And until I see you guys next time, no more war, no more debt, no more inflation, and no more empire. Peace out, guys. Catch you in the next one.